The night sky over occupied Crimea is orange again, and this time it is not a sunset, it is an inferno, a rolling wall of fire consuming the Semikolodezyanska oil depot in the Kerch district, 9 storage tanks packed with diesel fuel, bitumen, and petroleum products earmarked for Russian armored columns hundreds of kilometers to the north, all of it burning, all of it gone, and Russia's defense ministry, as it always does in these moments, claims its air defenses intercepted 95 Ukrainian drones overnight and suffered no damage to infrastructure, a claim immediately contradicted by NASA's own firm satellite monitoring service, which detected a massive thermal anomaly at coordinates 45.299289, 35.783779 at precisely 02:31 in the morning, confirming what residents of Lenino already knew because they heard 3 explosions between 02:05 and 02:14, watched the glow light up the horizon, and reported a fire that the Crimean Wind Telegram channel described as severe and sustained. This is what Ukraine's strategic war now looks like in June 2026, not a single dramatic missile strike, but a methodical, relentless, industrial-scale campaign to burn Russia's fuel network to the ground, one depot at a time, across a front stretching from the Bryansk forests deep inside Russia to the sun-baked shores of occupied Crimea. And what happened in the 48 hours between June 7th and June 9th represents perhaps the most concentrated logistics interdiction campaign Ukraine has ever executed in a single operational window, a campaign that is not just destroying equipment, but destroying Russia's ability to move, to supply, and ultimately to fight. Let us start at the beginning, at the operational picture as it existed on the night of June 6th into the 7th, because what Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces, the SBS, executed was not improvised or opportunistic. It was a planned, multi-axis, multi-domain strike package coordinated between the SBS, the Special Operations Forces, and military intelligence, hitting 26 separate Russian military, energy, and logistics targets simultaneously across Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, Crimea, and the Russian region of Bryansk. 26 targets in a single night, and the man who claimed formal responsibility for that operation is Colonel Robert Magyar Brovdy, commander of Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces, who published an official operational briefing on Facebook describing a sweeping multi-axis drone campaign that did not seek headlines but sought heat. The heat of burning fuel, the heat of exploding ammunition, the heat that tells Russian logistics planners that nowhere behind the front line is safe, that every depot, every substation, every radar installation, every fuel truck waiting in a queue is a potential target, and the next drone wave is already airborne. And the crown jewel of that June 7th operation was the Semikolodezyanska oil depot in the Kerch district of Crimea, a Soviet-era facility that sat dormant for decades until Russian occupation forces reactivated it in 2015 under the management of the Enterprise LLC BK terminal to service the fuel requirements of their garrison on the peninsula. 9 tanks of varying capacities, from 700 to 3,000 cubic meters each, fuel loaded onto truck convoys and driven west across Crimea and north into the occupied oblasts. And now, those trucks are loading nothing because the facility is destroyed, its satellite image confirming the fire that Russian authorities refused to acknowledge. But Ukraine was not finished, not even close, because less than 24 hours later on the night of June 8th, the drones were airborne again, this time reaching even further, this time hitting Novorossiysk, a Russian city on the Black Sea coast in Krasnodar Krai, where thick black smoke began billowing from the Grushevaya Balka oil depot. Photographs and video captured by local residents showing a towering column of black smoke rising over the facility that Ukraine's general staff then formally confirmed, confirming that Ukrainian forces had struck the Grushevaya oil depot near the settlement of Grushevaya Balka, causing a fire of still undetermined scale, but the strategic significance of what burned is absolutely clear to to anyone who understands Russian logistics, because the Grushevaya depot is not simply a fuel storage facility. It is a node within the Sheskharis transshipment complex, described as the largest oil storage facility in the entire Caucasus region, with a reported capacity of 1.2 million tons of fuel, a facility that handles the reception, storage, and onward shipment of petroleum from multiple major pipelines. And when that complex burns, it is not a Ukrainian tactical victory. It is a Ukrainian strategic blow to Russia's entire southern energy and military logistics architecture. And simultaneously, on that same night, another oil depot was struck near Simferopol, in the heart of occupied Crimea. The facility belonging to the A-10 conglomerate, Crimea's dominant gas station network, with a moderate fire confirmed by resident accounts published to the Crimean Wind Channel. And this matters enormously because Crimea is already in a fuel crisis. Russian occupation authorities have already begun distributing fuel vouchers and limiting gasoline sales, a direct consequence of the cumulative Ukrainian strikes on Crimean fuel infrastructure over preceding weeks. And what Ukraine did on the nights of the 7th and 8th of June is pour accelerant on a problem that Russian commanders on the peninsula are increasingly unable to solve.
Now step back from the flames for a moment and understand what this fuel campaign is achieving at the operational level, because the connection between burning oil depots in Kerch and Novorossiysk and the fighting in Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia is not abstract. It is direct and it is measured. In the fuel gauges of Russian armored vehicles, in the aviation fuel required to fly K-52 helicopter gunships that support Russian infantry assaults, in the diesel that powers the logistics trucks that carry ammunition forward to Russian artillery units, conducting the punishing fire missions that the Ukrainian General Staff reports happening daily across the contact line. Russian forces shelled settlements across Donetsk 27 times in a single day, killing 2 civilians and injuring 4 others. They attacked 3 districts of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast more than 20 times in a single day using drones and artillery. They launched 71 assault attempts in a single operational period, with the heaviest fighting concentrated in the Huliaipole and Pokrovsk directions. And every single one of those strikes, every artillery shell, every drone, every helicopter sortie, every armored column pushing toward Ukrainian defensive lines runs on fuel that has to travel a supply chain. And Ukraine is systematically burning that supply chain from the rear end forward, not with the dramatic single strikes that make for clean headlines, but with the grinding, cumulative, patient destruction of the logistical foundation that makes Russian offensive operations possible. The frontline picture as of June 8th and 9th shows Russian forces continuing to press forward in the areas they have been pressing for months. The Pokrovsk direction in Donetsk Oblast remains the axis of maximum Russian effort. Clashes reported near Nikanorovka, Rodinske, Hrishine, Kotleny, Udachne, Novomykolaievka, and toward Novy Donbass, Novoalexandrivka, and Shevchenko, a corridor of fighting villages that traces Russia's attempt to either capture or encircle Pokrovsk, the logistics hub that Ukraine has managed to defend through months of intense pressure. And in the Kramatorsk direction, clashes continue near Nikiforivka and toward Tihonivka, while in the Zaporizhzhia direction, Ukrainian forces are fighting to hold the Alexandrivka axis. And in Kharkiv and Sumy directions, Ukrainian forces repelled Russian assault attempts, while Russian occupation authorities in Moscow reported what they described as the full occupation of the settlement of Khimik in Donetsk Oblast, a small but symbolically loaded claim that Moscow's information machine amplified, while Ukrainian sources have not yet formally confirmed the full scope of Russian advances in that specific location, which is itself a reminder that the fog of war in this conflict is thick, and every claim from either side requires verification against geolocated footage and independent mapping, with the Deep State Mapping Project showing Russian advances near Pokrovsk and Zeleny in the days immediately preceding this reporting period, alongside Ukrainian forces clearing Russian positions near Voronezh, Sichneve, Pidubne, Tovste, Novohatske, and Zeleny High, a picture that shows the war is not moving in one direction but in many simultaneously. Now, the story pivots to one of the most alarming single events of this entire week, an event that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky described not with military language, but with moral language, calling it an exceedance of even Russia's already sky-high arrogance. On the night of June 7th, a Russian Shahed-type drone, the Iranian-designed Jiran-2 loitering munition that Russia produces domestically under license, struck the centralized spent nuclear fuel storage facility in the Chornobyl exclusion zone, damaging the spent nuclear fuel reception and reloading building and the IAEA administrative building at the facility, a strike that Ukraine's security service immediately classified as a war crime, that Ukraine's foreign ministry said it would bring to the attention of international partners, and that prompted the International Atomic Energy Agency to announce it was urgently dispatching a team of inspectors to assess the damage. And here is what makes this particular strike different from every previous piece of infrastructure Russia has targeted. This is not a power grid substation. This is not an oil depot. This is not even a dam. This is a facility designed to provide long-term storage for spent nuclear fuel from Ukraine's operating nuclear power plants, the kind of facility that, if critically damaged, could cause a radiological release affecting not just Ukraine, but potentially a wide swath of Europe. And while Zelensky and Energoatom both confirmed that as of the morning of June 7th, there was no exceedance of radiation safety limits, the very fact that Russia chose this target, struck it successfully, and has offered no public comment on the attack says everything about Moscow's willingness to escalate toward nuclear brinkmanship in the pursuit of what Zelensky called simply an act of terror. The strike on the Chernobyl facility came in the middle of a period of maximum Russian drone and missile activity that has been escalating sharply through late May and into June 2026, with Russia launching what the Ukrainian Air Force described as some of the heaviest aerial assaults of the entire war, over 400 drones and more than 40 missiles in a single attack wave on June 6th alone. A strike that President Zelensky called a cynical attack on ordinary cities that killed 4 people, including first responders, and injured 80 others across Ukraine's territory. That came, and this timing is not coincidental, as a direct Russian response to what Moscow called Operation Spiderweb, a Ukrainian operation targeting Russian airfields and military facilities in a preemptive strike that Ukraine's general staff said was executed hours before Russia launched that mass drone and missile barrage, meaning Ukraine knew the barrage was coming and moved first, hitting Russian airfields and storage facilities in an attempt to reduce the weight of the incoming attack. And while Russia still managed to fire hundreds of weapons at Ukrainian cities, the preemptive Ukrainian strike represents a new level of operational intelligence. Kyiv now has the warning time, the reach, and the planning capacity to hit Russian launch platforms before they can fire, a capability that fundamentally changes the calculus of Russia's air campaign. On the diplomatic and political front, the picture is equally grim for any near-term resolution, with Putin publicly dismissing on June 5th a direct open letter from President Zelensky calling for the immediate reopening of peace negotiations, and the Russian president hosting the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, what his critics call Russia's Davos, in his hometown, an event that drew thousands of international attendees, even as Ukrainian drones rained down on St. Petersburg Oblast, one of them striking and setting ablaze the St. Petersburg oil terminal, one of the largest oil transshipment complexes in all of northwestern Russia, an attack confirmed by Zelensky himself, who reported positive results from long-range strikes against key targets, including that terminal, while the Leningrad region's governor Alexander Drozdenko reported that 50 drones had been shot down over the region overnight, with attacks continuing to be repelled. The optics of a burning oil terminal on the outskirts of Putin's home city while he hosts global business leaders inside it is a piece of Ukrainian information warfare as much as it is a kinetic strike, a message that says Russia cannot protect its own economic infrastructure, even on its own soil. And NATO ally Romania separately reported an increased rate of Russian drone incursions into its airspace during this period, underlining how Russia's aerial war is generating instability and alerting allies far beyond Ukraine's borders.
What does all of this mean at the strategic level as we stand on June 9, 2026, more than 4 years into Russia's full-scale invasion? It means Ukraine is fighting a two-front war simultaneously, absorbing Russian pressure on the ground contact line, where Russian forces are grinding forward in Donetsk at a pace measured in hundreds of meters per day, and simultaneously launching an air and drone campaign of growing sophistication and reach that is systematically degrading the Russian military-economic complex from the inside, targeting not the soldiers in the trenches, but the fuel that feeds them, the electricity that powers Russian command systems, the ammunition depots that supply Russian artillery, the naval vessels that project Russian power in the Black Sea, and the oil infrastructure that bankrolls the entire Russian war machine. And the cumulative effect of that campaign is increasingly measurable. Crimea is experiencing fuel shortages severe enough that occupation authorities are rationing gasoline. The Sheskharis complex in Novorossiysk that handles a significant share of Russia's southern oil exports is on fire. The St. Petersburg oil terminal is damaged. A weapons factory in Tambov Oblast, nearly 600 kilometers from the front line, was struck on June 3rd. A Russian naval corvette was hit in its St. Petersburg dry dock, and the supply train corridors that Russia relies on to move materiel into occupied territory are under continuous pressure from Ukrainian drone hunters who have been tracking Russian logistics movements with satellite-tier precision and striking them with domestic attack drones that Russia cannot effectively intercept at scale. And none of this stops Russia. Russia is enormous and resilient and has already shown it can absorb punishment and keep fighting. But Ukraine is not trying to stop Russia in a single blow. Ukraine is trying to raise the cost of every Russian kilometer to a level that becomes unsustainable. And what the burning depots of Kerch, Novorossiysk, and Simferopol tell us is that Ukraine is doing exactly that, building towards a strategic exhaustion that no single battlefield map can capture, but that every Russian logistics officer planning the next supply convoy feels acutely, viscerally, every single day.